Thank you. This is the last session for the day. Don't be spooked, it's not going to be 90 minutes. We're hoping we're going to hit 100 minutes based on the level of conversation. So, traditionally we run round tables, but what I had a problem with was everyone would have to decide on a round table, they'd have the discussion, and at the conclusion everyone would just drift off and nobody would really get a sense of what the other tables spoke about. So I thought we'd put some more structure to this and use my esteemed panel to assist me here. What you're going to find is I'm going to get the highlight, I'm going to get the billboard for this session, but I'm going to do the least amount of work. So the way it's going to run, it's broken into two sessions. We're going to have round tables. Each one of the panellists will be the table facilitator. They will drive the conversation, and like we have 45 minutes in the script, but we'll just see what the level of conversation is like. I'll then call them back. They will then summarise what the table conversations were and bring up 3 or 4 points from the table. So it's really driven by the audience. It's not your traditional panel where I am asking Peter Westerveld what's going on at Norton Rose. It's what is your burning issue on the subject matter that the table that you're sitting at right now. So I encourage you to participate, and hopefully we can have a lively conversation. So for those who don't know me, my name is David Leon. I'm the moderator, and assisting me I have John Duckett from In-Place Solutions, who will be talking about cloud services. Peter Westerveld on bimodal IT. He's the regional CIO at Norton Rose, Fulbright. Andrew Mitchell, who's the CIO and National Operations Group Head at Griffith Hack, who will be talking on paperless office. Interestingly, at Albany last week, they were calling it more paper light office, so I don't know how far he's going to get with that. Alex Klenaris, his experience on mobile IT from Henry Davis York. Peter Bainbridge from Ethan Group, Solutions Architect. He's going to be talking about IT transformation. And last of all, we have Peter Campbell on security. So if you're at your tables now, I'll send the panellists down who will facilitate the discussion, and we will reconvene in about 20 minutes. Okay, well, this is where all of you get to benefit from everyone's discussion. So can I start with Andrew? You seem to have the most popular table there. And it seemed like we had to draw you away from there. Let's talk about the paperless office. Is like, from my perspective, isn't it something that we tried doing 20 years ago and we've just been failing at it?
Yeah, look, I think everybody's got pain. It's an issue, but I think there was a good question in regards to, really what are we trying to achieve? What are the objectives?
Can you talk into the mic?
What are the objectives that we want to achieve out of this, and why are we doing it? And, other than just, it can't be just cost savings, that's part of it. And it's all, technology is a part of it, but it's not the only part of it. And I think a couple of the big issues there that came out is there's a workflow component to it. There's a challenge in change. And it is a change. It's about change and change management within your organisation. The issue over OCRing handwritten notes was another one where lawyers have it traditionally to like to doodle and jot everything down, and then they want to keep that. And what can we use to actually OCR and scan it and keep an original copy? I think there was certainly, work on pilot groups. If you go out firm-wide to try and do it, it's not going to work because it's just so big. Start with a group who actually want to champion it and move it forward. Some have moved to default double-sided printing just to reduce the number of paper, even though you're not going to get rid of it completely, but at least that way you are reducing your footprint. Some have removed desktop printers. So, those little ones that lie around the place, of course, even the toners for those cost a fortune over time. So, that's good. Encourage electronic filing. You've got the comment there was made that there's one firm there that all files, even though they might be still printing and not forcing them to actually do everything electronically, that all files must be, a complete version must be filed electronically, even though if they want to print it, they can print it. And I think that's certainly a good first step, is at least make sure that there's an electronic copy. You've always got the issues later on of how long am I got to store this for, or, if it's going to be paper file, off-site, how many years does it have to be in off-site storage? There's a cost to that, and then of course there's the cost to actually storing it internally electronically. But going forward with that, there's a lot of opportunities to challenge the business and to streamline internally in how we do things and our processes. Find a champion to help. I think we can't do it ourselves. As IT in running it, we can't do it without somebody who actually wants to do it, and that's got to come from really an attorney at the end of the day. And then from a technology side, we did discuss, some various forms of technology that is being used to assist and help with reduction of printing, and those that have come from simply where you scan at your scanner and it automatically files it automatically into the Matter workspace, to other new products, relatively newer products on the market, such as Binder, ESP, who are here, and ImailX and IndocX, who have been helping a number of organisations. So it's a mixture of technology, but really the big thing is changing the way we do work.
Right. So let me just ask the whole panel a question here, because I'm sure they've all had some experience with this, and I'll throw it out to the floor as well. Is it ultimately driven by what the lawyer wants, or is it an IT business agenda to save costs and just get some efficiencies? And is it getting in the way of what lawyers do and how they work? I know there's some lawyers in the room. Someone might want to have a view on that. No? Yeah.
I think there's an age distinction. Anyone under about the age of 35 doesn't want to have anything to do with it. Everyone over the age of 35.
Yeah, so the whole notion of a paperless office could be a 2-decade proposition then. Yeah?
I'd challenge that.
Yeah?
Well, there's quite a few paperless implementations, the most successful implementation was strong leadership by the old senior practitioners of the private party. So, his thinking was that I'm going to get back to the one system that I started with the local part. And one system was paper, and then you had me in this dual paper electronic nightmare. So at least we can go to electronic version on behalf.
Right.
And some of our school or illness. Walking down to court with boxes.
Yeah. So I can talk from my own experience that we tried some bullying tactics, and we renovated our offices and we reduced the amount of on-site storage and took out storage in lawyers' offices, and all of a sudden I was like, what am I going to do with the storage? Okay, I've got to archive it, organise yourself around archiving. So we found boxes just doing this shuttle run between the off-site storage and to the office. And it was just creating this disconnection with the business and just the practice groups. So, and it didn't go down well. So we decided to just we would put an electronic filing system in, but also let them file, because human nature will prevail, and they'll just take the easy option. And it has taken over 5 years for that to happen. But it's done at their speed. So
yeah, it's a journey. I mean, certainly from our business, it's been it's not easy. We've got some practice groups who are all up for it, and others who will drag the chain. And it's just been the way they operate, and they like to operate. And yet you can't force it. I think you've got to Part of our challenge is we're becoming more and more nationally, and a particular case could go through many hands, and it could be going from different departments. So therefore we have a need for things to go electronic because people are not necessarily in the same spot anymore.
Right.
We just have a question from the floor, Dave.
Sure. I can't even read it.
They're getting old.
Can you have it on paper?
It's worse. Is that the one down the bottom there?
Yeah, highlighted, yeah.
When do all the steps come together to produce the completion of the paperless office?
We need proper mobility
When do all
for
the
that.
steps come together to produce the completion of the paperless office? Anyone from the panel?
I just want to give one more angle. I think sometimes it's also to recognise what the purpose of the paper is for. Is it to keep the record, or is it in the process of review? So, because if you do a banking affidavit that is 150 pages long, I can understand as a lawyer you might print it out and use that to review that particular agreement and make changes accordingly. Now, you might just use that because it's still easier sometimes for a lot of people, and I don't necessarily think this is about age, that it's easier to read and easier to review if it's on a piece of paper. But if you don't use it just for that review and then discard it afterwards, but you don't use that as a record, I think that's... So I think it's important, I think, to make that distinction. I mean, that's the way I work. I print some stuff out sometimes because I still find it easier to review a document or an agreement on a piece of paper, but I never keep the paper, it always goes.
Sure. Well, there's certainly a lot of low-hanging fruit that you can just get rid of, like all the back office admin type paper that just gets shuffled around. You can easily just get rid of that without affecting, lawyers' work product.
Yeah, I think Debbie mentioned one that she's done, is that's the electronic signatures.
Right.
Instead of sending the paper around for a signature, you can do it electronically, and there straight away you're saving some paper. Right. And it's simple. It's relatively simple.
Okay, I'm just mindful of the time because if we keep going to this duration with each session, we're going to be here forever. So let's move on to mobility. Alex, can you just give us a summary of your table, issues raised there?
Yeah, sure. So we had a pretty engaged table, so thanks Table 2. It's made my job easy. We had a mixture from large, medium and small firms as well. And right at the beginning, sort of just polled the group when you think of the word mobility, what sort of springs to mind? And there was security there, it's difficult, flexibility, devices, device management, access and giving them what they want. So, there's challenges throughout all, and I think we're all at different stages in terms of, that whole entire mobility piece. But there's definitely all of the firms still a mixture of devices, BlackBerries, iPhones, Androids, quite a lot of BYOD as opposed to firm provided. Concerns about securing the device. So what's the right MDM platform? Especially after this morning, that's right. But sort of on managing that, again, there's that, that holy grail. How do you really separate the personal from the corporate data? And if someone leaves on their own accord versus someone that's lost, a device at the back of a taxi, that's pretty easy to wipe. But, how do you ensure that all of the corporate data stays locked down and doesn't leak out through any other means? And then also too, just on mobility, it's about, making that desktop experience available to them on any device. Lots of talks about Surface Pro trials out there with direct access or VPN connection in, leveraging software as a service to consume whatever app they want to use. But also too, comparing the services versus laptops. But, iPads sort of keep making a mention there in terms of the device of choice for, I guess, gadget or tech-savvy partners as well. And what will happen? Will they eventually sort of wither away, and will the Surfaces win? And I think just really the reoccurring theme there was about what they want. Just their expectations are always high. They want to bring any device in. Again, they always want to use that latest gadget. And the expectations of IT is you're going to help me manage this, you're going to help me back it up, you're going to help me keep it up to date. and just continue to manage all of the new, gamut of devices that get released out. So it definitely was there's no silver bullet or magic pill. And again, it's different variations of mobility. No one has the complete answer, but we're all sort of solving different pieces of the puzzle.
Any views from the floor about mobility? I could say from my point of view, look, I've been working on a mobile solution for nearly 8 years now, and we've almost tried every product. But in the last 6 months, what we provided was that desktop experience just through Citrix Remote Desktop, and it has just revolutionised the place. And I can tell by looking at the stats of our RSA token use. We used to have 30% use, which meant there was only 30% of people logging in. Now we are oversubscribed now. We've got to buy more licenses now because they get the ability to leave their desktop the way it is, just lock the screen and then move that session to their home office. It just creates that productivity. They don't have to work in a different mode of how to find the app, and the screens look exactly the same. So I was challenged at my annual budget meeting with one of the partners that just said, well, what you've eventually done is just put in something that was available 10 years ago, So, which outraged me, and I said, well, it's not as if we go to Harvey Norman and buy, remote PC. We've got to scale all the security issues around a firewall, etc. So it's just, I think sometimes we try to overcook the solution. We try to get too smart, where we just really need to just sit down with some lawyers and say, what is your biggest pain point when you work from home? Because we found lawyers were driving back into the office after hours because they just couldn't handle the whole Citrix, published apps thing. They just wanted their desktop. Or with open documents, opening up a new version and then saving it and then trying to merge it back into the document management system. Is things that we, from an IT point of view, just took for granted. Because we don't work that way, do we? So, any other points on the panel there?
I just had a question really about the Surface and the direct access thing from Microsoft because we're interested in it. How many people are using that direct access thing? Is it good?
Excellent.
Yeah, because Citrix is really popular for us, but it doesn't cover the use case of sitting in the airport lounge wanting to quickly do something, and it doesn't cover working offline for a period of time because you can't get into Citrix, and it doesn't cover high latency, on the road or working on a mine site. We're hoping, that there are other options for that, and things like direct access might help, or offline editing tools, or I don't know. It's still a big mess as far as I can see.
Any other views? Well, let's talk about security whilst you've got the microphone. Peter, can you
Right,
talk about your
talking about
discussion?
big messes, security.
We got a view this morning.
Yeah. Yes, well, we've thrown all of our devices out. I think there were some themes that came around that we were all sort of interested in. That the first one is the challenge we all face to increase awareness of security to the people that pay the bills in the firm, the partners and lawyers. So it's the lawyers that don't seem to care and the partners who don't want to spend money on it. And we've certainly encountered that at Sparks. We had to go through a few things. CryptoLocker helped us get a bit more funding for security. Yes, I'll admit it, not to go outside this room. We had a CryptoLocker issue. Hands up who's willing to say they've encountered CryptoLocker in some form. Yeah, so I think in a way CryptoLocker's been good.
Well, you paid the fee, did you?
No, we certainly didn't pay the fee. But I think it's been good because it helped give an example that people could relate to, and for our firm it's made a big difference. It happened once, it hasn't happened since, and yes, we've hardened our systems and we've hardened our response, but people have learned, I think, too from that. And so seizing on an incident is what a couple of people came up, and it wasn't necessarily CryptoLocker, but they when one organisation wanted to harden their desktop and no one wanted to do it, and so they had it all ready, and so the next time there was some form of incident, that's when they presented it to the managing partner, and he said, yeah, all right, and I'm just going to push it through. So it was a good way of getting momentum behind something that was less popular as an initiative. Quite a few ideas of training and education, ad hoc emails to users. Some people are using phishing campaigns, software as a service, sending out emails and making them harder and harder for people to determine and catching them out. I think that's great. We've just finished building three learning management system modules for training and awareness. And quite a few firms are doing posters and regular emails, and so I think compared to, say, last year, there seems to be more activity in that space now, which is good. The topic of ISO 27, is it 001 or 0001? I don't know. 001 came up, and only one organisation had pursued it to the point of certification. But we at Sparks we've been through an assessment, and we've got to the point where there'd be some work that we'd certify, but we're not quite getting there because there's an ongoing cost, and our clients haven't forced us to do it yet. But what it's allowed us to do is now respond to their security questions in terminology that relates to them. And it's also allowed us, now we've got a more formal risk analysis, to challenge them on some points. We had an insurer that wanted us to encrypt everything at rest in the data centre and everywhere else, and we explained to them that they're sending us unencrypted emails, so that's pretty pointless. And so they backed off a bit, and we had a bit of an argument, but we were able to talk about it in the context of the risks. People also agreed around the table that it's about hardening your internals a bit more and having a better incident response. This acknowledgement, I don't know if it's fear, but I think it's justified that if we haven't been hit yet, we either don't know we've been hit or we're going to be hit. So we just need to be ready to respond to it more effectively, tightening up the backups, hardening the interior, good incident response. When we had a crypto issue, the best part was how we communicated with the firm because they knew what was going on. So we solved that faster. I'm trying to think of what else I've got here. But yeah, there is that thought that security incidents are elevating in complexity beyond tools and things that we used to be able to apply. And there was a thought that we might suggest that we all get together and put lists of security vendors or products that we found useful into a list somewhere that Chile could then circulate around for us, because there were certainly some great ideas around the table of particular products or services that might help us, because there's a lot of stuff out there. So I don't know if I missed anything, table.
All good. Yeah, that's interesting. I've got a question for perhaps the whole panel there. When we talk about security, do you manage your own security internally? Do you have a chief security officer? And what sort of team does he have? A risk manager? Or do you go out for external advice as well?
My infrastructure manager has now got a subtitle of Chief Security Officer.
Right.
And we leverage the risk manager an awful lot. And we leverage him and the Risk and Audit Committee, but the risk manager is great because he's a layman and we have to explain security things to him And then the process of going through that means it's then easier to explain it to the partners because we've gone through de-jargonising security, but we don't have any real dedicated resources.
Right.
We use a bit of external consulting, to help us with 27001 and things like that. We're thinking of an outsourced security, like log analysis or incident response, and we do have a phone a friend for incident response, an agreement in place, so if something happens, we can call someone quickly, but that's all we do.
Right. Anyone else? Pete?
Well, as part of a global firm, so we have a CISO and we have a team.
A team, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I suppose it comes down to the size of firm because, in the past we had a dedicated person that spent 2 hours a week on security and he was just being reactive.
Yeah, well, I think maybe I want to ask the audience a question because that's what, on a global level, we increasingly see that clients demand from us, not only to be 27001 certified, but also that certain demands about how laptops are managed, if particular documents, and if not, and so on. So I don't know whether people find that it's increasing, but we certainly find that it is increasing quite dramatically at the moment.
We filled in 7 surveys of quite formal and deep nature in the past year on security. 20 or 30 pages, a couple of them were specific response on a lot of the controls, and I'm sure a lot of hands up who's had to fill in a couple of surveys at least. Yeah, so it's happening a lot. And ILTA, when I went last year, they were talking about it, and they're exploding faster than we are, and they're getting so it's only going to get worse, isn't it?
Yeah, so that's where we made a decision. We employed a risk manager from Lovells, and the first thing she asked was, who looks after security here? So I pointed to the guy. She said, that's not good enough. So we outsourced the whole thing to a security company. Used to be Deloitte Digital. We spent an enormous amount of money, but they do penetration tests, they do all sorts of stuff. And it gives me, peace of mind that, we're doing the best we can when it comes to security. And it's not a conversation that happens at the board table because it's all outsourced. But it does come at a cost, and if you're going to do that at a global level, I couldn't imagine how much that would cost.
Well, I think it still comes back to the same question for everyone, and that's what I found over the years for security, is the question is how much is enough?
That's right. And that's where your risk manager comes in and plays the whole, okay, this is the risk exposure. Make a business decision on how much exposure do you want to that risk and how damage it could be to the brand of the firm or to your clients. So we went through that whole exercise. It was nearly a two-year journey. Okay, let's move on to something lighter. How about cloud services? John?
Thank you. I sort of knew you were going to ask me. Light, yeah. Okay, well, look, legal has actually been consuming cloud services for quite some time in some capacity, and long before it was probably called cloud services. The table, and thank you for your contributions, represented a mix of firms, so from quite very large international to smaller firms, and there was certainly consistency in the fact that everyone saw cloud services, the breadth of cloud services, because it covers a lot, as being fairly strategic. They all had business buy-in, so there was no disconnect between what the business wanted and what maybe IT wanted to deliver. And there was, different parts of the journey, how people had progressed, but so some to complete outsource cloud services, so everything was run in the cloud in some capacity, and others were just starting to move. So I think what we've seen in legal is certainly a greater consumption of cloud services. A number of them have been mentioned today. Some of them are present, like Mimecast, for example, which so many firms now, following, I guess, the UK success of Mimecast, have moved their email into the cloud, including archiving. Cause mentioned net documents, so true multi-tenanted DMS. I think a lot of businesses are interested in that. I mean, if those who can bring themselves to move away from iManage. Another one that just got mentioned, I think, at this table, DocuSign. So for paperless offices, you know, it's a consumption-based, cloud-based service where you can do your digital signatures, remove the need for paper, and you know, you've got a workflow process, so you can have multiple signatories, etc. Their payroll HR have been something that legal firms have been using for quite some time, so that is certainly not uncommon. And essentially the list goes on. So what are people looking at these services for is partly flexibility, I guess agility, easy to, you know, to move into cloud services without having to spend money. There's also an acknowledgement that quite often if you're looking at IaaS as a platform, just moving your own services there, it's still quite expensive, but that cost differentiator is coming down, so it's becoming cheaper. So I think in essence, the fact is that, and maybe it was the fact that the people who are into cloud were at the table I was at, so, but I think it's pretty obvious that increasingly the services you can get from the cloud are there, and that most law firms, and certainly ones I talk to outside of this room as well, have cloud services as part of their overall strategy. So essentially it's a matter of timing. For some it'll be a long journey. I think some of the larger firms it's not going to be quite so easy, and smaller firms will probably tend to consume it a lot more quickly. Was that light enough?
Yeah, panel, any thoughts? I think when it comes to cloud services, from our perspective, we had to really plan for cloud and be cloud ready. So, and in doing so, we looked at all our financial leases for the next 10 years, looking forward, because you know we're in the process of just buying and building solutions on premise. But if you ever want to go to cloud, you know, you've got this long tail of your capital costs that run off. So if you're going to set yourself up for cloud, and you're looking at moving something like Mimecast, for example, your email archiving on premise to cloud, you know, what's your current situation with your spend on premise, you know, all your licenses, because it will all be capitalized. So unless you want to double up on the cost, you know, it doesn't look good when you go to a budget meeting and saying you're going cloud and it's going to cost more because you've got this long tail that you're retiring and essentially just putting aside, but you're just paying it off. It's something that could really hurt you and just delay that process. You've got to break that cycle and get off that treadmill to get cloud ready. So we've got some solutions architects that have been working with us to give us a cloud-ready strategy from an infrastructure point of view, to the point where we want to get, you know, a direct connection to the Equinix data center to the cloud exchange. We're looking at putting dark fibre there. So it's not as easy as just making a bigger internet pipe and consuming cloud. You can do it that way, but I think that's the evolutionary model. If you want to do the revolutionary model, you just like break that process of what you're doing right now, look at the spin when it runs off, and then plan to go, you know, something completely different.
Yeah, look, one thing I should have mentioned, and not surprisingly, I don't imagine, is that there's usually a catalyst for change. One was a partnership that sort of broke up and needed to do a bit of downsizing. But the most common tends to be office changes, so office moves. So I know many of the people at that table were thinking, well, from a strategic point of view, they're going to move offices, so that would be probably the timing. I know other firms that are already planning those moves. Cause is probably a good example in respect it. What they've done more recently is geared around an office move. So that tends to focus businesses on what they're going to do, helps them, develop a strategy, and when so it starts before the office move, and then obviously continue afterwards. So.
Right. So extending on that, Peter, can you talk about consuming cloud as a service, no, software as a service?
So our focus at the table was more around migrating to cloud and how that might change the way that you consume infrastructure and services. So, I think by and large a SaaS first policy is being adopted quite a lot amongst multiple firms. And I think the move to SaaS is an easier one to justify because it generally has a direct business value-oriented conversation at the board. So, moving to a document management system is a very direct, contributable conversation to have around cost savings. So our focus at the table was more around the diminishing footprint in infrastructure services and how moving to cloud might change your practices and your adoption and your consumption of infrastructure. So we had a range of people at the table from post-cloud move, so everything, all infrastructure already in the cloud, through to people that are starting on that journey, and the types of considerations that would need to be made in maximising the benefit of adopting cloud services. So obviously we talked about the benefits of cloud, of being able to redeploy existing IT staff to focus on innovative projects and things that add direct value rather than kind of just turning the wheel on Exchange servers and those types of things. The move away from needing to be able to forecast and predict the infrastructure requirements, because essentially in your infrastructure cloud you have an unlimited resource supply, but also conversely, where you've got your own traditional infrastructure in your data center and you've already capitalized it, in a lot of cases you allocate the resources you've got because there's no reason not to. It's just going to be sitting there doing nothing. Whereas when you move to an infrastructure services cloud where you're paying by the hour or paying by the month for everything that you consume, you really do need to take a look at your list of servers and make sure that you are allocating just the resources that are required so that you don't end up with cost bleed. So it requires an analysis and understanding of what you need versus what you have. They won't necessarily align when you look to migrate to cloud. We talked about the fact that cloud isn't a cost saving. I think that bubble burst quite some time ago for most people, that the idea that cloud was automatically cheaper just isn't the case, but it does bring benefits like disaster recovery and availability, access to experts. When you engage a cloud services provider, you're generally assessing their ability to provide you a skill set that you don't have and that you don't necessarily need on staff. So it's almost a peripheral advantage to an infrastructure services cloud. One of the topics that came up at the table was changing the way that you consume resources to take advantage of the elasticity of cloud. So a lot of people will jump straight into cloud and move their entire infrastructure from point A to point B into a cloud solution, but unless they are looking at ways that they can shut down infrastructure that isn't necessarily being used all the time, they won't realise some of the benefits of cloud. I mean, elasticity is one of the key benefits. But if you don't change your work practices, you won't be able to take best advantage of that. We talked about security in a lot of detail, data encryption at rest and in transit, the fact that a vendor's holding all your data, and I'll segue into trust in a moment, but whether or not your information can be stored in Australia, whether or not it can be subject to Patriot Act, if that's a concern to you or not. Encryption takes away a lot of that conversation, because even if it's subject to Patriot Act, if your vendor doesn't have the keys, then no one can see the data anyway. And then we started talking about data classification. So, we talk about encryption, and as someone that's had that conversation a number of times when talking about the context of cloud, being able to encrypt data is one thing, but it's also an expensive process. The software itself is generally quite expensive. It's an extra overhead at the very least. But But migrating to cloud does require you to start looking at data in different ways. So what data is sensitive was a discussion that we had at the table. You really want to be encrypting the data that you care about security-wise, but you also need to have some sort of process to classify what data is sensitive and what isn't sensitive. The adoption of Office 365 shows that people don't consider email sensitive information by and large, or they haven't really considered it, and at some point it's a ticking time bomb waiting to go off. But the process of classification is an important consideration when moving to the cloud. The other things that we talked about, the focus shifts to the link, so the connection between your users and your cloud infrastructure. Typically it's no longer a data center on premise, obviously you're moving it out somewhere, so your lifeline is essentially that link, and how robust that link is determines how available that infrastructure service is, as does the vendor. So that kind of segued us into a conversation about trust and the need to be able to establish a relationship with your cloud services provider before signing on the dotted line to ensure that you can trust that vendor to provide the services they say that they can provide in the manner that they advertise that they can. But at the end of the day, it's generally a leap of faith, particularly if you're doing an all of business shift. You are taking a leap of faith that you've dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's, but until you turn that infrastructure on and it works and your business doesn't know that you've shifted, it really is a leap. And the last piece of advice from someone who had shifted everything to the cloud is have an exit plan and then pilot. So mitigate your risks as best you can, but also have an exit strategy should it fail.
So did you talk about the notion of cloud brokers?
No, actually that didn't come up.
Around last year, Gartner was just really pushing the fact that what we're going to need is a cloud broker that's going to broker all the cloud services for us and be able to mobilise our data, whether it's from AWS to Azure, and just so you can pick and choose and they'll just do all the contractual arrangements. It's kind of died.
Yeah, it didn't come up as a topic, and I think some of the wind has come out of that sale in the market anyway, with more and more capability to shift workloads and deal with them in one console, irrespective of where they sit, is becoming more prevalent. But the magic that concept has behind the scenes, that you can drag a workload out of here and drop it over here, a lot of the technology that makes that magic happen doesn't really exist just yet. Cisco's Intercloud is a good example of a concept of being able to drag and drop workloads and have some sort of transformation magic going on in the background. And we're converging towards that capability, but it's not quite there yet.
Yeah, I think we're seeing some software like Zerto that does that kind of work, that can just mobilise data and it just separates it from your server layer. So, any other views from the floor before we...
Another question in relation to if you have a large in-house infrastructure and large user base, if you move the whole infrastructure onto the cloud, is the performance going to be impacted at all? I mean, the people normally, users are using on the applications on a LAN, but when you move to the cloud, actually you are using on a WAN environment.
From my experience, that depends on the size and shape of your infrastructure. There's different ways to run infrastructures. People are using Citrix and have been for a long time, for example. We talked about that earlier, where your Citrix servers are talking to all of the back-end data processing systems and application systems, and moving those systems to the cloud doesn't change anything in terms of data transfer between the front end and the back end. Moving it to the other end of a link from your users, though, yeah, I mean, it's a consideration that needs to be made when moving to the cloud, absolutely. If those users can't access that Citrix server quickly for that screen refresh, then yeah, you're going to experience issues.
I'm talking more about the non-Citrix. You use thick clients.
Yep. So using thick clients to talk to back-end systems. So it would be a consideration. I wouldn't say that it's a block It's not but it is a hurdle that needs to be overcome. So you need to. There are processes to analyse the amount of data flowing between your data centre, whether that be on premise or elsewhere, from your users, and then size the links appropriately, and then look at carrier resiliency, because obviously, as I said before, it is the lifeline between the users and the servers. It's absolutely a consideration for looking at cloud.
Right, Peter, I've left you to the end.
Well, I'll be quick then. I think we had the privilege to have a few lawyers at our table, so that was excellent. First of all, the confirmation that, yes, the realisation that technology is going to be very important because it's going to mean whether we're going to keep our job or not. But at the same time, if I come into the office in the morning and it doesn't work, then I've got a gigantic problem. So at one point, the majority of the time I think we spend talking about how we better engage within the business with lawyers and IT and vice versa. In particular, then trying to look at that, whether a methodology like Agile will kind of help with that. So I think that was the most time we spent on. The last one was probably a little bit of a business opportunity for anyone. I think both of the lawyers were prepared to spend about $250 or $300 on an app that would automate the admission process and all the paperwork involved in that. So I don't know if anyone is interested in that, but.
All right.
But I think what that was, because it's a flippant remark, but I think it shows that just by the fact that we're sitting there around one table, that we actually came up with an innovative idea. So I thought that was very telling.
Right. Any other views from the panel about this subject? The only takeaway I have, even after your presentation, Peter, is that I get the agility thing, and you talked about IT engaging closely with the business. Like, traditionally, the only person that engages with the business is the IT director or CIO. The rest of the staff don't, right? So I think the profile of the IT staff has to change. So how do you do that? You just can't get someone out of the server room and say, hey, just go to the partners meeting and engage with them.
Yeah, so first of all, I think coming back, I don't want to redo the presentation, but I think that's where Agile or using some of those kind of principles helps, because it forces some of your people to do that.
Yes.
The other thing is you'll find that at Northern Rose now we're looking at a role of what we call business relationship management, where IT people need to have skills on how to engage properly with the business. So. Yeah. And I think if you go to cloud and so on, increasingly some of those infrastructure services you can just buy, either when it's a ready-made application or a piece of software or a piece of infrastructure. So increasingly I think IT itself and the job prospects and the opportunities within the IT industry will be focused around your ability to translate business opportunity in IT and vice versa.
Yeah, sure. Any closing comments from the floor before we wrap this up? We're right on 90 minutes, believe it or not. So if there's no other comments, can I thank the panel and the table facilitators for doing all the work for me?